Very good. Thanks, Ron. Terrific. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jeff Stout. I'm the director of the State Small Business Credit Initiative. I'm very pleased that you've joined us today to learn a little bit more about the Investing in America Small Business Opportunity Program. This is a $75 million competitive grant program for technical assistance services to small businesses. Our agenda, if we go to the next slide, today is to first provide some background and context for this funding opportunity, and then to walk through the NOFO step by step, make sure that everyone has understood each section, and to finally end up with some time for Q&A. So if you don't have the NOFO handy, you can find it by scanning this QR code or following the link at the bottom of this slide and pull that up and follow along. If you would, let's go to the next slide. I'm really grateful to be part of such a fantastic team here at Treasury. You'll meet some of them throughout the course of this webinar and in follow-up webinars covering this program. Some of these folks are Terry Riley, our grants manager, and Carmen Reed, and Terry Valadares, who will cover the details of the NOFO during this presentation. Peter Gillen and Jamie Lipsey, my colleagues, will also be available during the Q&A portion of this program. And right now, to provide some background on the motivation for this program and some context, it's my great pleasure to introduce the Chief Program Officer in the Office of Capital Access here at Treasury, Jessica Milano. She was previously a Deputy Assistant Secretary at Treasury during the first SSBCI and has been with us for almost all of the second SSBCI. Great pleasure to work with Jessica. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeff and team. Delighted to be here today and really excited by the wonderful turnout for this afternoon's webinar. It's my pleasure, as Jeff mentioned, I am the Chief Program Officer in Office of Capital Access. And we're very excited to present to you this webinar describing our new NOFO for the SSBCI Investing in America Small Business Opportunity Program. This is a $75 million competitive grant program that we just announced late last month. As many of you are very, very familiar with SSBCI already, the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 reauthorized and expanded the State Small Business Credit Initiative, which was originally established in 2010. And through SSBCI in this iteration, Treasury will provide a combination of $10 billion to states, the District of Columbia, territories, and tribal governments to expand access to capital for small businesses, build ecosystems of opportunity and entrepreneurship, and create high-quality jobs. SSBCI provides recipient jurisdictions funding for credit and investment programs for existing small businesses and startups, and technical assistance to small businesses applying for SSBCI funding and other government small business programs. This new opportunity we're here to discuss today represents a final chance to access a portion of SSBCI's technical assistance funding and is designed to complement the $200 million in formula TA funding that Treasury previously made available to states, territories, and tribal governments, and the $125 million offered through the Minority Business Development Agency's Capital Readiness Program, which also leveraged SSBCI funding. So this program is a unique opportunity designed to enable very small businesses, those with under 10 employees, and socially and economically disadvantaged businesses to benefit from the billions of dollars in economic activity generated by President Biden's Investing in America agenda, including from the American Rescue Plan, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. Federal funding from these statutes will be flowing into transportation projects, new energy infrastructure, and semiconductor manufacturing, among many other initiatives for years to come and in communities across the country. We designed the SSBCI Investing in America Small Business Opportunity Program to help ensure that minority, steady, other underserved businesses are able to participate in the historic economic opportunity from this legislation and scale their businesses and strengthen the communities in which they serve. So the SBOP, which we're calling it, has 4 key priorities and objectives. The first and most broadly, we want to connect businesses, small businesses, with loans or investments supported by the SSBCI Capital Program or other federal small business programs. And second, we want to enable city businesses and other underserved businesses to take advantage of business opportunities generated by some of these historic federal investments that we previously discussed, including those related to public and private infrastructure, critical manufacturing supply chains, and the clean energy transition. If we move to the next slide. Third, Treasury hopes to incentivize innovation in TA services through partnerships and regional collaboration between jurisdictions. Applicants for this program are encouraged to collaborate with other SSBCI jurisdictions, city-owned TA providers, or even non-traditional TA providers, educational institutions, and community-serving organizations that can help close gaps in existing small business TA networks and services and help us in this program reach new communities. And then fourth, and finally, we're hoping to scale the size of this effort through non-federal matching funds or private matching funds. Applicants are encouraged to secure commitments from outside partners that will help us leverage and expand the impact of this program beyond the initial $75 million. So thank you so much for your interest in this opportunity. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to the SSBCI program team to walk us all through the details on the program requirements.
Thanks, Jessica. Appreciate you being here today. Before we turn it to the team to walk through the details, I just want to underscore and highlight 3 quick points to provide some context before we dive in. The first is who is eligible to apply. This competition is open to states, territories, and tribal governments that will operate SSBCI capital programs. So we're really thrilled to have such a wide range of stakeholders on the call today: TA providers, foundations, economic development organizations, et cetera. Given the program's emphasis on partnerships and on reaching underserved businesses and scaling the grant with private matching capital, we want to encourage discussion among all of the stakeholders. But at the end of the day, it will be a state, territory, or tribal government that will make application to Treasury. The second point I wanted to underscore was that this is a competitive grant, right? So for jurisdictions that applied for SSBCI capital programs or for the formula grants, you're used to the Treasury team providing very direct support throughout the application process. But given that this is a competition, our interaction is going to be a little bit more limited. So out of fairness to all applicants, we won't answer questions about strategic aspects of your application, but we will have a series of webinars to cover the NOFO. We will issue FAQs more frequently than we do in the capital program, and we'll accept questions by email at ssbci_information@treasury.gov. Don't worry about taking that down. That will be in these slides multiple times. And finally, I wanted to talk about the deadline. This is the most frequent question we've received so far since publishing the application, but you'll notice that the deadline is in the NOFO is 60 days after the publication of the application as opposed to a fixed date. So as we finalize the application, we wanted to give applicants extra time to create partnerships and identify sources of match, et cetera. So while there's not a fixed date yet, I want to emphasize that the application will not likely be due until the spring of 2024. So there is time for you all to speak with one another and come up with a good strategy to apply for this opportunity. And in the meantime, the NOFO should provide sufficient information so that you can start preparing your application. With that, I will turn it over to Terry to walk us through the program.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Jessica. So both Carmen and I are going to be taking turns with the remaining slides. Our plan is to walk you through the NOFO and ensure that you're left with all of the important details in the NOFO. So in terms of the program overview, as Jeff and Jessica mentioned, this is a competitive grant program. Treasury intends to award grant funding to support programs that propose innovative and high impact models for delivering TA services in the areas of legal, accounting, and financial advisory services, often referred to as TA services, to VSBs and businesses owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, or SETI-owned businesses. Both of these terms are defined in the SSBCI guidance as well as in the NOFO. So throughout this presentation, we will be referring to VSBs and SETI-owned businesses applying for capital programs and other federal or other jurisdiction small business programs. And collectively, we refer to these two entities as eligible beneficiaries. So note that, as Jessica mentioned, this program is one of the SSBCI group of programs. It will complement the $200 million in TA funds already available through the allocation formula-based TA grant program. And few points to note on this program. So there are three notable examples of how an application may be scored more highly. One, if it includes high quality existing or proposed collaborations with project partners. And these project partners may include jurisdictions, cities, or other political subdivisions, educational institutions, community serving organizations, and other industry stakeholders. Two, if it leverages public or private cash matching commitments. And three, if it is designed to serve eligible small businesses on a regional basis. Another key point to note is that recipients may make subawards to other organizations to act in an administrative role. And the next couple of slides, we'll cover just very briefly some useful background on the SSBCI Capital Program and the allocation formula-based TA program. A few of these points were already reiterated by previous speakers. So through the Capital Program, jurisdictions provide financing to small businesses via loan or equity or venture capital programs tailored to their local market conditions. The SSBCI Capital Program is expected to catalyze up to $10 of private investment for every dollar of SSBCI Capital Program funding, amplifying the effects of almost $10 billion in funding allocated to the capital programs and other programs, and providing small business owners with the resources that they need to sustainably grow and thrive. So in terms of the allocation-based TA program, this, as was mentioned, is a formula-based program. It is not a competitive grant program. However, like the SSBCI Investing in America SBOP, the program discussed here today, the allocation formula-based TA program is also designed to support eligible beneficiaries by providing those businesses with legal, accounting, and financial advisory services. So let's now move on to the award summary. On this slide, we present a brief summary of the NOFO. So the SBOP program, or the SSBCI Investing in America SBOP, is a discretionary grant program. This means that grants are awarded competitively based on the programmatic, technical, or other aspects of the application. The estimated total program funding is $75 million. The award range is estimated at $5 million to $10 million, and 8 to 15 awards are anticipated. The period of performance is up to 36 months or 3 years. In terms of the time frame, you may have heard Jeff refer to this earlier. Applications are due 60 calendar days once the final application has been published to Treasury's website. The NOFO will also be updated on the application, with the application due date, and will be published on the website. So note that applications must be submitted via the UST portal. And we do have a link in one of the later slides so that you can access that when the time comes. So the next slide covers or presents an overview of the time frame showing the key events and milestones. So a few things to note. So we're planning to host a second pre-application webinar. The date and time are to be determined. We're also expecting to post PDF of the draft application sometime in winter of 2023 or 24. That would be followed by the opening of the application portal with the final application in the winter of 2024. And once the portal has been opened, we will hold application webinars to guide jurisdictions through the submission process. So note that we are projecting that applications will be due in spring of 24 or 60 days after the final application is available. Treasury is hoping to issue awards sometime in the summer or fall of 2024. Now I'm going to hand the presentation over to Carmen, who will talk about some of the eligibility requirements.
Thanks, Terry, and good afternoon to everyone. Now that we've gone over the basic details of the program, let's move on to talk about who is eligible to apply. As Jeff mentioned, any state, territory, the District of Columbia, or tribal government, each considered a jurisdiction, that has been approved as a participating jurisdiction in the SSBCI Capital Program is eligible to apply. Jurisdictions that are not yet approved as participating jurisdictions in the SSBCI Capital Program, but have submitted complete and timely SSBCI Capital Program applications or are part of a joint tribal government application are also eligible to apply. However, to receive an award under this program, a jurisdiction must be approved as a participating jurisdiction in the SSBCI Capital Program. Groups of tribal governments may apply jointly, i.e. in a consortia. For additional requirements applicable to joint tribal applications, we do recommend you see the TA Grant Program FAQ number 3 for these additional requirements. Although states, territories, and the District of Columbia may not apply jointly, an application from these applicants or from tribal governments will receive more points if the TA program is designed to serve eligible small businesses in multiple jurisdictions within the same region. Note that cities and other municipalities within or outside of a state applicant are not themselves eligible applicants, but are considered jurisdictions for the limited purpose of awarding regional collaboration points to eligible applicants. The NOFO describes 4 ways an applicant may be considered for regional collaboration points, so we do recommend you review those 4 examples in the NOFO. Now that we have talked about who is eligible to apply, we will discuss who are the eligible beneficiaries under this funding opportunity. Eligible beneficiaries under this program are VSBs and SETI-owned businesses that are applying for a jurisdiction's SSBCI Capital Program or other federal or other jurisdiction small business program. Both of these terms are defined in Section A.2 of the NOFO. Please note that some businesses may qualify as both VSBs and SETI-owned businesses. Now let's move on to talk about who is eligible as a TA provider. The recipient themselves may provide the TA services. The recipient may make a subaward to certain subrecipients to provide TA services. The recipient may contract with third-party legal, accounting, and financial advisory firms to provide the TA services, or the recipient may make a subaward to a non-federal entity that is not an entity of the recipient or an LAF firm if the subrecipient acts in an administrative role and will contract with or make subawards to jurisdiction entities or LAF firms that will serve as TA providers. A point to note when engaging subrecipients or contractors, using SAM.gov, recipients must verify prior to entering into a subaward or contract that the subrecipient or contractor is not suspended, debarred, or otherwise excluded from or ineligible for participation in federal assistance programs or activities. Finally, let's move on to discuss what services are eligible TA services under this award. Eligible TA services provided to an eligible beneficiary under an SSBCI Investing in America SBOP award include legal, accounting, and financial advisory services, such as legal services, like assisting with business formation or adopting corporate governance documents, obtaining needed registrations, licenses, filings, and certifications, advising on or preparing documents for the business to enter into contracts, accounting services, such as preparing audits, financial statements, or business records, or financial advisory services, assisting with applications for government small business programs, including preparing financial analyses, identifying sources of credit, capital, grants, and other financing. There are many additional examples of legal, accounting, and financial advisory services available in the NOFO in section C4. If you have any specific questions about eligible TA services, please email the address provided throughout this presentation, ssbci_information@treasury.gov. Now that we've talked about eligibility under this program, let's move on to discussing non-federal matching funds. As mentioned earlier, one of the objectives of the SBOP program is to scale this effort through non-federal match or private matching. Although matching is not required, applicants will receive points for commitment of matching funds to support the project. Examples of matching fund sources may include commitments from businesses, nonprofits, including philanthropic partners, and the jurisdiction's own non-federal funds. The proposed match must be cash, included in the project budget, and available at the time of award, committed to the project, and not encumbered in any way. Note that in-kind or non-cash contributions are prohibited as match under this program. A couple of additional points to note about non-federal matching funds. The application review criteria prioritizes those applications that can demonstrate how the use of matching funds will be leveraged in conjunction with this program's grant funds to make a significant impact in providing needed TA services to eligible small businesses. If matching funds are proposed in the project budget, the proposed matching funds must be documented by a letter of commitment from each provider of the funds. That letter of commitment must clearly state the amount and state or evidence that funds are available, committed, and unencumbered. Matching funds that do not have corresponding letters of commitment will not be considered in the application review process.
Thank you, Carmen. So now we'll continue the presentation. On this slide, you will see we have summarized all elements of the application. Note that several of these elements will only be required in certain cases, and I'll talk about those elements now. So the delegation of authority is only required if the authorized official named in the application has delegated the authority to another official of the applicant's jurisdiction to certify and electronically sign the application on behalf of that jurisdiction. Documentation evidencing the delegation of authority must be submitted to Treasury. The next, if applicable, document would be the joint tribal application designation documentation. This is only required if a consortium or a group of tribal governments is applying jointly. So if that is happening, or if that is proposed, the consortium must submit the joint tribal application designation documentation. So note that the forthcoming application template, which, as we've mentioned before, will be posted on Treasury's website, it will provide additional information on both of these requirements. That is the delegation of authority and the joint tribal application designation documentation. The next document is the negotiated indirect cost rate agreement or cost allocation plan. So this is only required if you are proposing indirect costs in your budget and you're not claiming the de minimis indirect rate. The Form SFLLL, or the disclosure of lobbying activities, this is only required if the applicant has lobbying activities to disclose. And then there are other supporting documents that you may submit. Some of these would include letters of matching funds commitment, letters from other jurisdictions, including municipalities, that demonstrate a plan to coordinate on a regional approach, and letters of partnership support, which detail the specific roles and responsibilities of engaged project partners. So let's now discuss the designation document. So the applicant letter of designation, in terms of the requirement for that document, the eligible applicant for a jurisdiction, which may be a specific department, agency, or political subdivision of the jurisdiction, will be required to submit a designation letter on official letterhead signed by the governor of the state, mayor or mayor of the District of Columbia, or governing official of the territory or tribal government. These requirements are further specified in section D2B1 of the NOFO. And with respect to the delegation of authority in the joint tribal designation documentation, if applicable, as I've mentioned previously, the forthcoming application template will provide additional information on both of these requirements. And as a reminder as well, the application template will be posted to Treasury's website when it is available. So the next several slides will cover one of the key sections of the application, which is section 3, the program design and substance. This section of the application should not exceed 15 pages, and all components of this section should be prepared using a 12-point font and with 1-inch margins. So please bear with us as we go through each of these sections to ensure that it is clear what the requirement is. In section 1, the executive summary, which should be no more than 1 page. It must include a brief overview of the proposed project and activities. It should also include what you propose to accomplish and a summary of proposed activities and deliverables during the performance period, as well as a brief narrative on the likely broader impact resulting from the grant's success. Section 2, the description of project service area and potential to connect eligible beneficiaries to opportunities. In this section 2, you should describe the location and region of the project, the existing resources and assets of the service area to support the small businesses, and the rationale for the service area selection. Thirdly, you should also describe the types of business opportunities the project is designed to help eligible beneficiaries access and leverage. And then finally, in this section, do include a needs assessment of the eligible beneficiaries in the project service area in terms of accessing and leveraging the identified opportunities and any limitations or gaps in coverage. Section 3, the proposed solution. So in this section, applicants should describe, 1, the proposed solution and how it aligns with the needs of the eligible beneficiaries and overcomes any limitations or gaps in coverage in providing the TA services. 2, how the proposed project will help eligible beneficiaries access, leverage, and scale into the identified opportunities. 3, how the proposed project supports eligible small businesses applying for the SSBCI Capital Program and other programs that support small businesses. 4, how the project is connected to relevant small business programs. Note that applicants should provide evidence that demonstrates how they will leverage other existing programs and funding sources that currently assist VSBs and SETI-owned businesses. And then 5th, how the project will launch new programming or scale existing programming aimed at reaching eligible beneficiaries that are currently underserved. And one note here is that the narrative should also include relevant information and data. So you should clearly demonstrate how the project will create added benefits for the project service areas, VSB and SETI program infrastructure, and provide data to support those claims. And also provide information and data used to design the project in a way that effectively addresses the beneficiaries' needs, particularly the information and data on barriers to capital access, and how the project will address those needs to connect the beneficiaries to identified opportunities. Section 4, key partners and project support. Applicants should describe their current partner network, including public and private entities at the national, state, regional, and local levels that will be working on the project. Be sure to identify the TA providers that you plan to work with under this NOFO, or identify examples of TA providers that are representative of the network of providers that you intend to work with. Alternatively, if target partners are not identified, you should describe your strategy for identification and outreach. And one note here is that throughout the application evaluation criteria, Treasury prioritizes applicants or will prioritize applicants that demonstrate how they improve on any self-identified limitations in their traditional networks beyond the reach of the formula SSBCI TA grant program. And then thirdly, describe the partner's roles and responsibilities on the project and include information about any past collaboration efforts. 4th, describe your concrete outreach plans to engage new partners who will support the project. Then 5th, describe your strategy to reach VSBs and SETI-owned businesses. That strategy could include regular internal organizational meetings to assist project implementation and planned outreach efforts. For example, you may want to address publicity, email campaigns, neighborhood canvassing, and so on. And then finally, in this section, you must also address the statutory requirement relating to the prioritization of SETI-owned TA providers by describing your efforts to prioritize SETI-owned providers to work on the project. So if an applicant chooses to contract with third parties to deliver the TA services, they must prioritize providers that are SETI-owned businesses, consistent with any applicable federal, state, and local requirements. So in your application, you must explain how you will implement this requirement and prioritize such providers. So for the purposes of this requirement, prioritization may be satisfied by 1, having a partnership with one or more SETI-owned TA providers, or 2, procurement processes, outreach efforts, and a program design that would enable SETI-owned TA providers to be reached. Next, let's discuss section 5, the organizational capacity and experience. In this section, applicants should articulate the relevant prior experience that they have and any proposed, and also the relevant prior experience of any proposed TA providers. You should also describe your ability and the ability of any proposed TA providers to execute the project. And so if TA providers have not yet been selected, please include a description of the process for identifying the future TA providers. In this section, you must also discuss your capability to directly implement the TA project or to manage subrecipient or contractor implementation, if that's what you propose to do. Then you must also discuss any subrecipients or contractors' capability to implement the TA project or to manage the implementation of lower tiered subrecipients or contractors. And you must discuss the process, the source, and tools used in identifying and determining the capability of the TA providers. So next, we'll move on to the performance goals and measures, and I'll hand it back to Carmen.
Okay, I think we skipped forward one slide. Terry, we can go back one. Yep, perfect, thank you. So section 6, we will move into performance goals and measures. And on this one, applicants are required to describe the goals of their proposed project and the output, outcome, and impact-based performance measures and benchmarks that they will use to achieve those goals. Applicants' goals must align with the overarching performance goals of this program to provide TA services to eligible beneficiaries, as described in the overview of the NOFO. Applicants' performance measures must align with the minimum performance measures set out on the next slide. If awarded, Treasury, through performance reports, will track the recipient's progress in implementing the performance measures outlined in their application, meet the performance goals of this award. The sample output, outcome, and impact-based measures shown on this slide are examples of the types of performance measures that applicants may include in their proposed project. One example of an output measure or services delivered may be the number of classroom-style events completed by the project. One example of an outcome measure or results may be the number of successful applications for SSBCI Capital by eligible beneficiaries participating in the project. One example of an impact-based measure may be the number of jobs created by eligible beneficiaries who were assisted by the project. Note that these are examples only, and applicants are not required to include all of these measures. Let's move on to talk about the budget narrative. Applicants must provide a budget narrative using Treasury's budget narrative template. This is a line item-based budget organized by budget category. Applicants must also identify and explain how funds in each line item of the budget will be used to support the proposed project. Applicants must provide specific justification for all budget categories that apply, including eligible direct, eligible indirect costs, and program income. We have included in the NOFO descriptions of the eligible direct categories such as personnel, fringe benefits, travel, equipment, supplies, contractual, and other, as well as the indirect cost category and a list of unallowable costs. Note that unallowable costs are expenses that will not be funded. Applicants must also include an explanation of the necessity, allowability, reasonableness, and allocability of proposed costs. Eligible costs must be determined in accordance with 2 CFR Part 200, Subpart E, and other program guidance, including Section D, 2B, 4 of the NOFO. Each cost category should be treated consistently in like circumstances as either direct or indirect costs. Applicants must not double count any costs as both direct and indirect. The budget narrative should not repeat information provided in the program design and substance section, but should provide additional detail needed to understand the amounts allocated to each budget line item. While matching funds are not required in this grant program, any voluntary matching funds committed to the proposed project must be clearly identified in the budget narrative. Next slide. Oh, perfect. If you include indirect costs in your budget, such costs must be supported by a current federally approved negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, or NICRA. Or if you do not have a current NICRA and receive less than $35 million in direct federal funding per year, you may elect to use the de minimis indirect rate, which is currently 10% of modified total direct cost, as defined in the uniform guidance as cited on this slide. If you or your organization have participated in lobbying activities, you will also need to complete Form SFLLL, Disclosure of Lobbying Activities. The next requirement that we'll talk about is the assurance of compliance with civil rights requirements. If approved, recipients must comply with legal requirements related to non-discrimination and non-discriminatory use of federal funds, where such laws are applicable to a recipient and any subrecipient or contractor operating program activities on the recipient's behalf. All state, District of Columbia, and territory applicants must download, review, and have the authorized official sign the assurances of compliance with civil rights requirements form, which will be made available in Treasury's forthcoming portal and/or on Treasury's website. Any state, District of Columbia, or territory that is recommended for funding under this NOFO will also be required to undergo a Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of pre-award compliance review before being funded, and will be required to complete a Title VI narrative form that will be provided separately by Treasury. Applicants may, but are not required to, submit a Title VI narrative form with the application. The next requirement we'll talk about are the program assurances and certifications. All applicants must review, sign, and submit the SSBCI Investing in America SBOP's assurances and certifications, which will be included with the application and will become a part of the grant agreement if awarded. If matching funds are proposed in the project budget, they must be documented by a letter of commitment from each provider of the funds, as applicable, that clearly states the amount and states or evidences that the funds are available, committed, and unencumbered. Matching funds that do not have corresponding letters of commitment will not be considered in the application review process. Applicants may provide documents that substantiate elements of their application and their ability to successfully execute the project. These documents may include letters from other jurisdictions, including municipalities, demonstrating a plan to coordinate on a regional approach as consistent with NOFO Section C1, and letters of partnership support, which detail the specific roles and responsibility of engaged project partners. While not required for each application, these additional supporting documents may help as an application be scored more highly. Now let's turn it over back to Terry and talk about application submission.
Thank you, Carmen. So there are two essential requirements for application submission. The first is SAM.gov registration. So applicants must ensure that they're registered in SAM before submitting an application. And applicants must be sure to maintain an active SAM.gov registration with current information during the time that they have an active federal award or an application or plan under consideration. Applicants will have to provide a valid unique identifier, UEI, in the application. And note that pass-through entities must also ensure that that any subrecipient they're engaging, if proposed and approved, is registered in SAM.gov before disbursing any award funds to that subrecipient. Also note that Treasury may not make a federal award to an applicant until the applicant has completed or complied with all applicable UEI and SAM.gov requirements. So if an applicant has not fully complied with the requirements by the time Treasury is ready to make an award, Treasury may determine that the applicant is not qualified to receive an award and use that determination as basis for making an award to another applicant. The second requirement is that applicants must create an ID.me account for Treasury portal access. So you do need this ID.me account to submit an application. And point here to note is that there are steps outlined in the NOFO to guide you through the process to create an ID.me account. So next, we'll discuss briefly the form and method of submission. So the application submission portal is the only means by which applications will be accepted electronically. And alternate submissions, such as paper, facsimile, or email transmissions, are not permitted unless Treasury has approved in writing before the application deadline. So the deadline for submitting an application to Treasury via the portal is 60 calendar days from the date the application is available or published. And as mentioned previously, Treasury will issue a separate notification when the application is published that would specify the application deadline, and then Treasury will update the NOFO accordingly. Again, another point to note is that Treasury strongly recommends that jurisdictions submit applications substantially before the application deadline. Applications received after the deadline will not be considered for funding.
So as we've discussed throughout the presentation, applications will be scored based on a set of factors. Specifically, applications will be reviewed by a minimum of 3 reviewers and will be scored competitively given the 4 main criteria listed on this slide. We will go into detail on the upcoming slides about each of these criteria, but you can see here the relative weight of each criterion, given the number of points awarded for each. Under each criterion are individually weighted scoring factors, which contribute to the overall score for that criterion. MER reviewers will respond to prompts for each of the scoring factors by indicating the extent to which they agree with the statement as it applies to the application. Each factor will be given a score from 1, strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree. and these scores will be appropriately scaled based on the number of points assigned to that scoring factor. For example, if a criterion is worth 10 points and the merit reviewer's response to the relevant criterion prompt is agree, the application will receive 8 points for that criterion. The first scoring criterion, which is worth 40 points total, is proposed goals and solutions. This criterion looks at whether the applicant's proposed goals and solutions align with the assessed TA needs of small businesses in the project service area to connect them with capital. Under this criterion, reviewers will consider the following factors. To what extent do you agree that the application identifies specific TIA opportunities to connect businesses to capital needed to participate in an existing economic development cluster or to participate in manufacturing, supply chain, or contracting opportunities, particularly including opportunities generated by recent federal legislation? This factor asks reviewers to consider the plan presented, its connection to the needs of eligible beneficiaries, and whether it is likely to prepare businesses to participate in an economic development cluster, including opportunities generated by recent federal legislation. This factor counts a total of 15 points. To what extent do you agree that the application's outreach strategy and partners credibly address the opportunities identified? This factor asks reviewers to consider the outreach plans to reach beneficiaries and project partners. This factor counts a total of 10 points. To what extent do you agree that the application effectively provides TA for SETI-owned businesses and VSBs and identifies how the proposed project will improve outcomes from prior efforts to increase such businesses' ability to secure financing and business opportunities? This factor asks reviewers to consider plans for new partnerships and improved results for underserved businesses and counts a total of 10 points. To what extent do you agree that the application includes high-quality existing or proposed collaborations with project partners, which may include other jurisdictions, cities, or other political subdivisions, educational institutions, community serving organizations, and industry stakeholders, such as companies, suppliers, and service providers? This factor asks reviewers to consider if the application proposes and includes letters of support from a variety of partnerships that are likely to make the project successful and meet the needs of eligible beneficiaries. This factor counts a total of 5 points. The second criterion is organizational capacity, which counts a total of 30 points and looks at whether the applicant and any proposed partners have the capacity to succeed in connecting eligible beneficiaries to small business programs. This criterion asks reviewers, to what extent do you agree that the applicant and TA providers have the capacity to execute the plan presented? This scoring factor asks reviewers to consider the experience of the applicant and any project partners. If project partners have not yet been identified, this factor considers plans presented to select these partners. This factor counts 20 points. To what extent do you agree that the TA providers have the capacity to provide services in a linguistically and culturally relevant manner? This factor asks reviewers to consider the needs of SETI-owned businesses and whether the TA providers selected or the plan to select them aligns with these specific needs. This factor counts 10 points. The next criterion is budget and timeline, which counts a total of 25 points and looks at all budget documents, including letters of matching funds commitment. This criterion asks reviewers, to what extent do you agree that the budget line items appear to be reasonable, allowable, and allocable to the proposed project? This factor asks reviewers to consider whether the budget line items and narrative justifications align with the costs identified in the proposed project and counts 5 points. To what extent do you agree that the budget narrative appears to be feasible and aligns with the activities described in the program design and substance section of the application? This factor asks reviewers to consider whether the budget line items and narrative align with the costs identified in the proposed project and the timeline's alignment with the budget and outcomes. This factor counts 10 points. To what extent do you agree that the application is supported by leveraged public or private matching fund commitments that will contribute to successful outcomes and project long-term sustainability? This factor looks at whether matching funds are presented and if these funds are likely to contribute to the proposed project's success. This factor counts 10 points. The final criterion is project reach, which counts a total of 10 points and considers the defined project service area and identified project partners. This asks reviewers one question. To what extent do you agree that the proposed project will result in a regional economic benefit beyond the reach of the applicant's standard jurisdiction? This asks reviewers to consider whether the applicant proposes a plan to participate with other jurisdictions to develop a regional footprint and provide TA services across jurisdictional lines, most aligned with beneficiary need. Now that we've talked about the scoring criteria, we will move on to outline the review and selection process. Applications will first be reviewed for eligibility and completeness. Applications from ineligible entities will not be considered further. Applications that are incomplete and that do not contain all forms and required documentation may be deemed non-responsive and excluded from further consideration. Next, eligible and complete applications will be forwarded for merit review. Merit reviewers will evaluate applications against the evaluation criterion that we talked about on the previous slides. Each application will be reviewed by at least 3 merit reviewers. Once all eligible and complete applications have been scored, the highest scoring applications will be forwarded to senior ranking federal employees who will evaluate the application and the feedback received in merit review. Senior leadership may determine not to recommend a highly ranked application based on the results of a risk review. They will also review the list of potential grant recipients to determine whether the pool of recipients meets certain goals, such as range of population sizes and poverty rates, and broad geographic coverage and service area types. Once a list of potential awards has been selected, senior leadership will recommend to the Chief Program Officer or delegate who will make the final award decision. Finally, during the due diligence process, applicants that have been preliminarily identified to receive grant funding may be required to submit additional documentation or information to allow Treasury to fully evaluate compliance with applicable rules and regulations. Throughout the review and selection process, Treasury reserves the right to seek clarification from applicants whose applications are being reviewed.
Thank you, Carmen. So now let's briefly touch on the notice of award. So Treasury plans to publish a standard template of the TA grant agreement on its website. However, if an applicant is selected for award, Treasury will provide each selected applicant's specific and tailored award letter and grant agreement to the applicant's authorized representative. So this grant agreement or notice of award document will include the award terms and conditions and any special award conditions that may apply to the award. So next, this slide provides us with a couple of notes on the notice of award. So if the applicant fails to execute and return the grant agreement within the specified timeframe, Treasury may irrevocably withdraw the grant without any further notification to the applicant. Also note that if an application is funded, Treasury is under no obligation to provide any additional future funding in connection with the award or to make any future awards. Any amendment to increase the grant funding or extend the period of performance is entirely at Treasury's discretion. So in terms of award notification, note that Treasury anticipates announcing awards sometime in or after summer of 2024. Notification of the award will be electronic or via email. That is, no paper copies of the notice of award will be issued. And if there is a public announcement on awarded applicants, it will be posted on Treasury's website. So please continue to monitor the Treasury website. And the final note here is that all award decisions are final and not subject to appeal. So there are several upcoming events to note in winter of 23 and 24. We plan on holding application webinars and portal demos to discuss the application package and help you through the application submission process. Then in winter or spring of 2024, we plan on having office hour sessions to respond to questions on the application package and portal submission. We will share the dates and times for the events with jurisdictions and interested parties or stakeholders well in advance, and we will provide a registration link. On this slide, we have included some links to some valuable resources, including a link to the NOFO, just in case you are unable to access the NOFO via the QR code on the second slide. We're hoping that these resources will help you prepare complete, compliant, and responsive applications for the SSBCI Investing in America SBOP or SBOP. And then we've come to the final slide. But before we dive into questions, or we pause for questions, just a few notes here that if there are any relevant questions, please submit them via the meeting chat feature. And also note that out of fairness to all applicants, we cannot answer questions during the application stage that are, questions that are related to the strategic aspects of the project, including project design and project creation. However, we do anticipate addressing some common questions via the publication of FAQs on Treasury's website. In the event, though, that we are unable to answer your question, or if you have a follow-up question, please email SSBCI_information@treasury.gov with the subject line SSBCI Investing in America SBOP. So we'll pause there and see if there are any questions. Ron and Jamie, are there any questions that you'd like us to address?
There's a few questions in the chat. I'm happy to pose them here. So the first question is, can you clarify, states may not submit joint applications with other states, but are still encouraged to provide regional services?
Yep, sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself. Yeah, so there's a few examples in the NOFO about how states can, put together a regional application without applying jointly. Let me see if I can find that section of the NOFO, and I'll drop that into the chat. But there's some examples there, and feel free to email the inbox with questions, and we'll turn those into FAQs. Or we'll, plan to turn those into FAQs.
Great, thanks, Jamie. So the next question is, will a recording of this presentation and the presentation itself be shared to those who are participating? I think the answer to that is yes. We intend to post the recording of this to the website, and then we can share that out once that's posted. Another question here, can bank lending commitments be counted in matching funds And if so, how should bank commitments be calculated?
So this is tricky, and I think there may be some confusion here. We may need some more information on this question, and let me know if I'm misunderstanding. But the TA program is going to be different than the capital program, right? So in general, if a private entity is providing matching funds under the TA, under this grant program, in general, a lending commitment to a small business probably will not meet the requirements of the TA NOFO, right? So any matching fund commitments under the TA grant program will have to be used for the eligible costs under the program, which are providing legal, accounting, and financial advisory services. So what you're trying to do with your matching commitments is expanding the breadth of your program to provide those services. And I may be reading the question wrong, but I'm not sure that would work. But if you'll submit that question to the mailbox and maybe provide us a little more detail, we can work on an FAQ to address or otherwise address.
Great, thanks, Jamie.
Sorry, that was a lot of words.
So the next question is just asking for clarification about the total number of scoring points for the application. Does that add up to 105, or did the questioner do their math incorrectly?
You got it. It's 105.
Yeah, great. And then there's a few questions here, and I think it might be some folks who were able to join a little later and maybe missed it up front, right? Asking questions about who is eligible to apply, right? So if we can just sort of maybe reiterate the point about who is eligible to apply for this specific funding.
So under this particular program, only jurisdictions are eligible to apply. So the applicant has to be, a state, DC, a territory, or a jurisdiction, a tribal government that submitted an application under the SSBCI Capital Program. So that's your set of applicants and recipients. But of course, recipients, the states, the jurisdictions can work with nonprofits as TA providers, so long as those nonprofits qualify as legal, accounting, or financial advisory firms under the program. Sorry, I'm throwing a lot of jargon at you, but I think the baseline, can nonprofits apply? The answer is no, but nonprofits can work with jurisdictions in their projects in some capacity.
And then we have a couple of questions here that I think are asking for a little bit more clarification about what qualifies as eligible TA services, right? Those categories, legal, accounting, and financial advisory services are broad, right? I think if we could just sort of talk through that a little bit more, I think that would be helpful.
Yep, so if you look in section, I'm sorry, I should have had my NOFO up, but the list of legal, accounting, or financial advisory services, the list of eligible TA services in section 2.4 of the NOFO is not exclusive, right? There's an exemplar list of services. So to a large degree, what types of services are considered eligible TA services will depend on how the jurisdiction has structured its program, sort of the businesses it is trying to assist, so just take a look at that services, that list of TA services. It starts on page 14 of the NOFO. work with your jurisdiction, and we're happy to also get that question in the inbox.
Then we have another question here about the how many awards Treasury intends to make with the funding.
So the NOFO specifies, I think it's between 8 and 15. Of course, it will depend on sort of the scope of awards and the size of the awards that that Treasury determines that it selects. But that's sort of the general expectation, the general framework of how many awards we expect to make, between 8 and 15. And they may vary in size and scale.
Okay. So the question just came in. What are the key differences between this funding and the TA funding that has already been awarded?
So the TA funding that has already been awarded was based on an allocation formula for each jurisdiction, and this one is really based on how competitive. It's a competitive grant program, so how well an application speaks to the objectives of the NOFO and how well it scores under the evaluation criteria that are included in the NOFO. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Jamie. Another question here, is the match commitment on a per year basis, or will that have to be committed in total at the time of application?
Good question. We'll take that back and sort of wrestle with that, and if that is a frequently asked question. But I think my off-the-cuff response is that your match commitments, to be considered in the evaluation, the selection process, your match commitments would need to be committed up front at the time of application, if that makes sense. So you would need whoever's providing your matching share funds to, be committed, be able to state that the funds are ready should an award be made, and will be committed to the project.
All right, and our next question here, what should the interaction be between the SBOP award, if selected, and a state's SSBCI TA formula award? For instance, if SSBCI TA is being implemented through a sub-award, does the SBOP award need to be implemented in the same way?
Nope, definitely not necessarily. The SBOP is really designed to help fill gaps that you may have identified in your formula TA, your regular TA offerings in your jurisdiction, to fill those gaps, to expand on your existing services. So you don't necessarily have to sort of have one mirror the other. And you can try something new and innovative, and we definitely encourage that.
And I think you touched on this question that just came in the answer there, Jamie, but I'll pose it to you too, in case there's something else you want to add. The questioner writes, I understand this grant program is competitive, but will the jurisdiction be allowed to leverage the current TA program in strategies?
Ooh, yeah, definitely. Well, right here, I'm saying that very, very assuredly. I think it, in my best lawyer voice, it depends. Definitely, we would want to, it might be nice to show in your application how, the two programs are designed to talk to each other, how, maybe your SBOP application is designed to use a use an infrastructure that's in place and expand on it. So you know that could work if that's what's being meant. So the two programs can definitely talk to each other for sure. Hopefully that is. And I may not be understanding exactly what's being asked. So feel free to email the inbox.
Well, I don't see any other questions here in the chat. But as we have indicated several times throughout the webinar, this is not your only time to get your questions answered. So as you ruminate on this, or as you see the eventual recording of this, feel free to email questions to ssbci_information@treasury.gov. And with that, I'll turn this back over to Terry and Carmen.
Thanks, Ron. So this concludes our pre-application webinar for the SSBCI Investing in America SBOP. Happy to give folks some time back. So thank you for your time and thank you for participating. Take care, everyone.